Okay, so we've got this pretty hefty pile of news and analysis to go through today.
It's quite a bit.
And it's all centered around April 7th, 2025. So
Right.
I guess our mission today is to try to sift through all of this and extract the key insights, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a lot going on. So
Yeah.
we got to give our listeners a clear understanding of what's happening and,
Right.
why it all matters.
Yeah, exactly. So it looks like we're going to be looking at a lot of different things.
We are. Yeah, you've assembled quite a snapshot here
Yeah.
of a pretty active period, let's say.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about some pretty significant economic shifts.
Yeah.
A lot of this is driven by, these new trade policies that are being put into place.
Yeah.
And we'll also be looking at changes in leadership in the cyber defense arena.
Okay.
Some pretty widespread public protests that are happening.
All right.
Some interesting maneuvers in the Senate regarding the budget.
Yeah.
Concerning measles outbreak that's happening. And it looks like there are cuts to vaccine funding that are coinciding with this.
Wow.
An ongoing election challenge in North Carolina.
Okay.
The reaction of law firms to the administration.
Yeah.
Judicial pushback against some of the executive actions.
Right.
Early Senate polling data coming out of New York.
Okay.
And even some updates to the House political maps.
Wow. Okay, so a lot on our plates today.
A lot going on, but,
Yeah.
The goal isn't to
Yeah.
overwhelm anyone.
No, absolutely not.
Right. It's more about,
Trying to connect the dots.
exactly connecting the dots between all these seemingly separate events.
Right.
And highlighting the potential significance,
Yeah.
of each of these events and how they might be
Yeah.
connected, really giving people,
A clear, concise picture
exactly, a clear, concise
of
picture.
what's actually going on.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's start unpacking all of this, maybe starting with the economic picture.
Okay, sure. So the source material kind of paints a pretty stark picture right off the bat when it comes to the financial markets.
Okay.
The Dow Jones has taken a pretty significant downturn.
Yeah.
It's almost 15% off of its yearly high at this point.
Wow.
And there's been a massive loss in just 2 days. About $6 trillion just wiped out.
Oh, wow. In just 2 days.
In 2 days.
Yeah.
This is being described as the worst week for the market since we saw that pandemic-induced volatility back in 2020.
Makes sense.
And what's really fascinating here is that,
Sure.
the sources are really drawing a direct connection between this market downturn and the administration's trade policies.
Right. Yeah. The analysis we have really doesn't mince words, does it?
No, it doesn't.
It's
Pretty bold.
Yeah, it's pretty bold. It basically argues that this is the end of the post-World War II free trade system,
Wow.
as we know it,
Yeah.
and that it's being replaced with what's described as this kind of 18th century idea, this thing called mercantilism.
Mercantilism.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I wasn't really that familiar with that term.
It's not one you hear every day.
Yeah. No, it's not something you hear every day, so I had to look it up,
Right.
And the basic idea seems to be that a country's wealth
Yeah.
is measured by its gold reserves, and the way to get more gold is to export way more than you import.
Right, basically, you want to hoard all the gold.
Right, accumulate as much as you can.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's this really, I don't know, it seems very outdated.
Yeah, it does. It's interesting because the source even quotes, someone saying no serious economist has believed in this theory in well over 100 years.
Right. It is this kind of blast from the past.
It is, yeah. And I think that's what makes it so fascinating.
Yeah.
Because it's
you don't really expect to see these kind of ideas
Right.
resurfacing in the 21st century.
All right. And it's even more interesting when you start to connect it to the bigger picture that the source is trying to paint about the state of the U.S. economy.
Right, because the picture that's being presented is really quite different from how it's often portrayed.
It is, yeah.
You hear a lot of talk about a poor, hollowed out America, right?
Right, yeah. That's kind of the, a nation in decline.
The common narrative.
Yeah. But the data that's presented here suggests a different story.
Totally different.
Right. It says that the U.S. economy has actually doubled the growth of the Eurozone since 2008.
Yeah, that's a pretty significant difference.
It is, yeah. And then you see that U.S. wages are actually significantly higher than in other advanced economies.
Yeah. I mean, think about that for a second.
Yeah.
I'm not just talking about, a little bit higher. We're talking significantly higher.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big gap.
Big gap.
And then they even highlight the fact that even a state like Mississippi,
Right.
which often gets kind of a bad rap,
Yeah.
economically speaking,
For sure.
actually has a higher per capita GDP than countries like the UK or France.
Right. It kind of flips the script a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. You have to wonder then if the problem that this new trade policy is trying to solve is actually, you know, is it even a real problem?
Mhm.
Yeah, it makes you question the diagnosis, right?
Exactly. Is the diagnosis of the economic problem even accurate to begin with?
Right. Are we actually as bad off as they're saying we are?
Exactly. And I think that's what makes this whole thing so interesting, you know?
Absolutely.
Because you have this like underlying assumption
Right.
about the weakness of the US economy
Yeah.
that might not even be true.
Yeah.
And then you have this like radical shift in trade policy that's being based on that assumption.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting, I think, because the sources then point out this major oversight in this whole mercantilist approach.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
It seems like they're completely missing the huge U.S. surplus in services.
Services. What do you mean by that?
Things like software development, financial services, cloud computing.
Oh, so the things you can't really touch.
Exactly. These less tangible exports,
Right.
but they add up to a massive surplus over $1 trillion annually.
Wow, that's huge.
It's a massive part of our economic strength.
Okay, so it's like they're so focused on, you know,
Yeah.
physical goods and manufacturing.
Pretty neat.
Yeah, that they're completely missing this like giant and expanding part of the economy.
Right. It's like looking at one side of the ledger and ignoring the other.
Right. So while the rhetoric is focused on,
Yeah.
the struggling manufacturing sector,
Right.
the data is actually telling us that there's this powerful and growing service economy.
Exactly. And that's a fundamental mismatch between perception and reality.
Yeah, it really is. And that might be the biggest flaw in this whole, new trade doctrine.
It could be, yeah. I mean, the potential consequences of these policies are pretty concerning.
In what way?
Well, for example, the sources highlight agriculture as being particularly vulnerable.
Agriculture? Why agriculture?
Well, because of retaliatory tariffs from other countries.
Oh, right, of course.
They put tariffs on our goods. Other countries are going to retaliate.
Tit for tat.
Exactly. And agriculture is often a prime target.
Right, yeah. I remember all those farm bailouts during the last administration.
Exactly. And now you've got higher inflation, higher interest rates. It's just a recipe for economic hardship in that sector.
Right, it's like American farmers are caught in the middle.
They are, yeah.
Hmm.
They're potentially losing access to these crucial international markets. They're facing higher costs at home. It's a tough situation.
And on top of all that, the Federal Reserve's getting worried too.
Oh, really? What are they concerned about?
Inflation, they're saying these tariffs are just going to fuel inflation even more.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, and the concern is that this could force the Fed to raise interest rates.
Oh, to try and cool things down?
Exactly. But then that increases the risk of tipping the economy into a recession.
Right. It's a tough balancing act.
Yeah, so you've got this like double whammy of potential problems.
Yeah, you've got the direct impact on specific sectors like agriculture.
Right.
And then you've got this broader macroeconomic risk of inflation and recession.
And then you bring in the whole specter of stagflation. Yeah, that's what they're calling it. It's like...
That's a scary word.
It is. It's a scary word. It's this combination of slow economic growth,
right?
High unemployment, and persistent inflation.
Yeah, it's like the worst of all worlds.
It really is. And they're even drawing comparisons to the 1970s,
Oh, wow, the Ford and Carter years.
Exactly, when the economy was just a mess.
Right, so it's like they're saying we could be headed back to that.
Yeah, potentially. And the thing is, back then, there was at least like an external shock,
Like the oil crisis.
Right, something you could point to and say, okay, that's what caused it.
Right.
But now it's like we're doing this to ourselves.
We're creating our own problems.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
It is. And, when you start talking about tariffs and the cost of imported goods, there's another potential consequence that we have to consider.
What's that?
Smuggling.
Smuggling? Like, what do you mean?
Well, think about it. If these tariffs make imported goods significantly more expensive,
Okay.
what's going to happen?
Well, people are going to try to find a way around them.
Exactly. And one way to do that is to smuggle goods across the border.
Right. So you're saying, like, if a product that used to cost, let's say, $1,000
right.
suddenly costs $1,500 because of tariffs,
yeah,
people are going to try to find a way to get it for that original price.
Exactly. And if it's still available at that price in another country,
right,
there's a huge incentive to bring it in illegally.
Right. So you're saying we could see like a modern day version of prohibition.
It's not entirely out of the realm of possibility.
Wow, that's kind of crazy.
It is. And it raises this question of, Are these tariffs actually going to achieve what they're intended to do?
Right, because if they just lead to like a booming black market
Exactly.
and lost tax revenue,
Right. Then what's the point?
yeah, it seems counterproductive.
It does. And what's interesting is that some people within the Republican Party itself are starting to voice these concerns.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the article quotes Senators Ted Cruz and Rand Paul, and they're expressing some pretty serious worries about the potential economic and political fallout from these tariffs.
Like what kind of fallout?
Well, they're talking about the possibility of a recession,
Okay.
and they're also concerned about the impact on future elections.
Oh, right, because if the economy tanks,
Exactly. Voters tend to punish the party in power.
yeah, that's usually how it goes.
And Senator Paul even brings up some historical examples.
What kind of examples?
Well, he talks about times when high tariffs were implemented in the past.
Oh.
And he points out that the ruling party often suffered a major backlash at the polls.
Oh, wow. So he's basically saying, like, look, we've been down this road before.
Right, and it didn't end well.
And it seems like he's trying to warn his own party.
It does, yeah. It's like he's seeing the danger ahead,
Yeah.
but doesn't know how to change course.
It's like they're trapped in this, like,
Yeah.
ideological echo chamber or something.
It's possible.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder about, the internal pressures that are at play.
Right, like what's really driving these decisions?
Exactly. And then there's the question of, how much of this damage can be repaired down the line.
Oh, right, because once you know
Yeah.
erode trust with your allies,
It's hard to rebuild that.
yeah, it's not like you can just flip a switch and everything goes back to normal.
It takes time and effort, and it's not even clear if it's possible to fully restore things.
Right, it's like that quote from the European diplomat.
Oh, is that?
They said, "We can't have European security depend on the voters in Wisconsin every 4 years."
Wow, that's pretty powerful.
It is. It really highlights how much is at stake.
It does. Yeah. It's about more than just trade. It's about
Yeah,
global stability and the credibility of the U.S. as a reliable partner.
absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about the economic picture. Let's shift gears now and talk about national security.
Okay. Cool.
Because there's some pretty serious concerns being raised about America's cyber defenses.
There are. Yeah. And it seems like there's been a pretty significant shakeup at the top.
Oh, really? What happened?
Well, the head of the National Security Agency, General Timothy Hoff,
Oh.
and his deputy have reportedly been dismissed.
Oh, wow. That's a big deal.
It is. Yeah, and the reason being given for their removal is, it's pretty alarming.
What is it?
Apparently, it's due to the influence of a conspiracy theorist.
A conspiracy theorist.
Yeah.
You're kidding.
Nope, that's what's being reported.
That's wild. And we're talking about the head of the NSA here.
We are, and it's important to remember, General Haas' credentials. We're talking about a 4-star Air Force general,
Right.
the commander of Cyber Command.
Right. So this isn't some random guy.
No, this is a highly experienced and respected leader in the field.
And they're getting rid of him because of a conspiracy theorist.
That's the story that's circulating.
It's unbelievable. And this raises some really serious questions about,
Yeah.
the decision-making process within the administration.
For sure, especially when you consider the absolutely crucial role that the NSA plays.
Right. I mean, they're responsible for intelligence gathering, code breaking, protecting U.S. computer systems from attack. I mean, it's like,
It's a vital agency.
yeah, it's the front line of cyber defense.
Exactly. And to have that leadership removed under these circumstances,
Yeah.
it's deeply concerning. And, even Senator Mark Warner is quoted as expressing his concern.
What does he say?
Well, he specifically mentions the Salt Typhoon attack from China.
The Salt Typhoon attack, can you remind us about that?
Yeah, so that was a significant cyber espionage campaign that was attributed to China.
Okay.
And they managed to compromise some pretty sensitive data within the Justice Department.
Wow. So it was a serious breach.
It was. Yeah, it just highlights, the very real danger that the U.S. faces in cyberspace.
Right. And so Senator Warner's point is that at a time when these threats are so real,
Yeah,
how does firing the head of the NSA make anyone safer?
exactly. It's a pretty straightforward question.
Yeah, it is. And it's a really troubling one.
It is, and it's not the only concern that's being raised.
What else is there?
Well, there are also reports of budget cuts and staff reductions at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency.
CISA, and they're responsible for...
They're the ones who are supposed to be protecting critical U.S. infrastructure
Okay.
and election systems from attack,
So they're basically in charge of making sure our elections are secure.
among other things, yeah.
Okay.
And Representative Don Bacon, who's a retired Air Force general himself,
Okay.
he's quoted as saying that Russia and China are probably laughing at us right now.
Oh, wow. That's harsh.
It is, but it kind of underscores the seriousness of the situation.
Yeah, I mean, if we're weakening these agencies at a time when cyber threats are increasing,
Yeah, it seems incredibly risky.
yeah, it's like we're shooting ourselves in the foot.
It does make you wonder, who benefits from all of this?
Right. Who benefits from a weaker America
Exactly.
and a less secure electoral system?
It definitely raises some unsettling questions.
It really does. Okay, so let's move on now to a different kind of reaction that we're seeing to the administration's policies.
Okay.
And that's the emergence of these widespread public protests.
Oh, right. Yeah. It seems like the administration's actions have really stirred up a lot of opposition.
Yeah, our sources are reporting mass anti-Trump protests happening all across the U.S.
Wow.
They say there could be over 1,200 to 1,400 different locations.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and they're even seeing protests in international cities like London.
So it's not just a domestic phenomenon.
No, it seems like there's a global element to this as well.
And it's interesting that these protests seem to be largely grassroots driven.
You're right. Yeah, there's this group called Hands Off.
Hands off.
Yeah, and they've provided like a toolkit, with guidance and resources.
Okay.
But the individual events themselves are being organized and carried out locally.
It's very decentralized.
It is, yeah, and they have three main demands.
Okay, what are they?
First, they want to see an end to what they see as billionaire influence and corruption in government.
Okay, so they're concerned about the role of money in politics.
Exactly. Then they want a halt to cuts in federal programs.
Okay, so protecting social safety net programs.
Right. And finally, they want to see an end to attacks on marginalized communities.
Okay, so addressing issues of social justice and equality.
Exactly. So you've got this like multifaceted movement
Yeah.
that's addressing economic issues, political issues, and social issues.
Wow, that's a pretty broad coalition.
It is. And the numbers at some of these demonstrations are really significant.
Yeah, how big are we talking?
Well, the piece mentions an estimated 100,000 people gathered at the National Mall in Washington, D.C.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah, it's a lot of people, and it quotes Representative Jamie Raskin, who gave this really fiery speech.
What did he say?
He basically condemned the administration's policies.
Right.
He specifically called out the tariffs as imbecilic, illegal, and unconstitutional.
Wow, that's strong language.
Yeah, it is, and it really shows you how much anger there is out there.
Yeah, and while these protests might not, immediately force the administration to change course,
Right.
they definitely serve a purpose.
In what way?
Well, first of all, they provide a morale boost, for people who oppose the administration.
Right. It's like, okay, we're not alone in this.
Exactly. It's a show of solidarity.
Yeah.
And then perhaps even more importantly, they could serve as a warning sign
A warning sign to who?
to Republican incumbents who are facing re-election in 2026.
Oh, right. Because if the economy does take a downturn as predicted.
Exactly. Voters might take out their frustration on the party in power.
Yeah. And these protests could be an early indication of that.
It could be, yeah. It's like a canary in the coal mine.
Okay, so protests as a potential harbinger of political change.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's turn our attention now to the Senate and what's been happening with the federal budget.
Sure. So it looks like Senate Republicans have managed to pass their version of a budget framework.
Okay, and how did that go down?
Well, it was a pretty narrow victory,
Okay.
not without some dissent within their own ranks.
Oh, really? Who voted against it?
Well, Senators Rand Paul and Susan Collins were among the Republicans who opposed it.
Okay, so not a unified front.
No, not at all. And Senate Democrats, knowing that their own amendments were unlikely to pass,
Right.
they kind of strategically used the vote-a-rama process.
The vote-a-rama process.
Yeah, it's this marathon voting session where they just vote on amendment after amendment.
Okay.
And the Democrats use this to force Republicans to take public stances on some potentially unpopular things.
Like what?
Well, things related to Social Security, for example.
Okay.
And, of course, the proposed tariffs.
So it was kind of like a political trap.
In a way, yeah, they were trying to get Republicans on the record supporting things that might hurt them in the next election.
I see. So it was more about political maneuvering than actual policy making.
In this case, yeah, it's all part of the game.
Okay, so they managed to get this budget framework through, but there's this really controversial aspect to it.
Oh, yeah, what's that?
It's what they're calling magic accounting.
Magic accounting.
That sounds shady. It does a little bit. So basically, the plan operates under the assumption that the 2017 tax cuts
Right.
won't expire.
Okay, but they're currently set to expire, right?
Exactly. But this budget pretends like they're just going to continue indefinitely.
Oh, I see. So that allows them to project further tax cuts.
Right.
without it looking like they're increasing the deficit over the next 10 years.
Exactly, but it's all based on this manipulated baseline.
Yeah, it's like they're cooking the books a little
Okay.
bit.
It kind of feels that way.
And this whole thing is tied into a potentially really significant procedural move that Senator Lindsey Graham is considering.
What's that?
He's talking about trying to bypass the Senate parliamentarian.
The parliamentarian, who's that?
So that's Elizabeth McDonough, and she's basically the referee of the Senate.
Okay.
She's the one who decides whether specific provisions can be included in budget reconciliation bills.
Budget reconciliation bills? Remind me what those are again.
Sure. So basically, those are bills that can be passed with a simple majority. They can't be filibustered.
Right.
And they're often used for budgetary matters.
Okay.
So the parliamentarian's job is to make sure that everything that's included in these bills actually relates to the budget.
Okay, so she's kind of like a gatekeeper.
Exactly. And now Senator Graham is talking about trying to find a way around her.
Oh, wow. So that he can include things in the budget that she might not approve of.
Exactly. And
Yep.
the sources are saying this is like a nuclear option.
The nuclear option.
Yeah, it's a term that's been used before when talking about changing Senate rules.
Right.
And it usually refers to things that could really weaken the role of the minority party
Okay.
and make it easier to pass legislation with a simple majority.
So it's like getting rid of the filibuster.
It could be a step in that direction.
And the concern is that this could fundamentally change how the Senate operates.
Absolutely. It could really shift the balance of power.
Yeah, because if committee chairs can just decide what qualifies for budget reconciliation
Right.
without any oversight from the parliamentarian.
Then it becomes much easier for the majority party to ram through their agenda.
Right, so it's a pretty big deal.
It is. Yeah, and the long-term consequences of this could be really significant.
Yeah, because what one party does when they're in power
Yeah,
can easily come back to bite them when the other party takes over.
exactly. It's like a double-edged sword.
Yeah. So it's like they're playing with fire a little bit.
A little bit. And on top of all that, there are these big differences between the Senate and House budget proposals.
Oh, yeah. What are they fighting about?
Well, one of the main sticking points is the extent of spending cuts.
Okay.
The Senate version is much more aggressive in terms of cutting spending.
And the House is not so keen on that.
No,
Yep.
they're more reluctant to make those kinds of deep cuts.
Okay. And what else?
Well, there's also disagreement about the state and local tax deduction, the SALT deduction.
Oh, right. That's a big one for certain states.
It is, yeah, and the two chambers have different approaches to how they want to handle it.
So it sounds like the reconciliation process is going to be pretty messy.
It's probably going to be a fight.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's move on now to this public health issue that's causing a lot of concern, the measles outbreak.
Right, so this outbreak that started in Texas, it's now spread to over 20 states,
Oh, wow.
and there are hundreds of confirmed cases.
And are people dying?
Sadly, yes, there have been reports of fatalities.
Oh, that's awful.
It is, and to make matters worse, the administration has decided to claw back a bunch of money
Claw back money from what?
from funding that was originally intended for vaccine clinics across the country.
Oh, wow. So they're taking money away from vaccination efforts.
Yeah, it's about $12 billion that they're taking back.
That seems so counterproductive, especially in the middle of a measles outbreak.
It does, yeah, and the timing is just terrible.
So this funding was originally allocated during the COVID-19 pandemic,
Right.
and states had the flexibility to use it for various vaccination efforts.
Including measles vaccinations.
Right, so it seems like a really bad time to be pulling back this funding.
It does, and there's a lot of criticism of this move.
Yeah, I bet there is.
One quote that really stood out to me was from Adrienne Casalati, who's with the National Association of County and City Health Officials.
Okay.
And she said, "We have not seen this in public health, where money already obligated and out the door was clawed back."
So this is unprecedented.
It seems to be,
Yeah.
and the impact is already being felt.
Oh, yeah, how so?
Well, for example, Dallas County had made plans to set up 50 vaccine clinics,
Wow.
and now they've had to cancel those plans.
Because the funding is gone.
Exactly. And the director of Dallas County Health and Human Services, he describes the situation as very disruptive.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And he even suggests that this might be intentional, you know.
Intentional to what? To make the outbreak worse.
Well, he doesn't say that explicitly, but he does say that this isn't just affecting blue states or red states.
Right.
It's affecting everyone.
So it's like a deliberate attack on public health.
It's hard to say for sure, but it's certainly a possibility.
And to make matters worse, 23 states have filed a lawsuit challenging this funding clawback.
Wow. So there's a lot of pushback against this.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of people are really upset about it.
It's understandable. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a public health emergency, and they're taking away resources.
It's like they're not taking it seriously.
It does seem that way.
And it's like we've already been through this whole thing with the vaccines and autism debate, you know?
Right, all that misinformation and fear-mongering.
Exactly. And now it's like we're going backwards.
It's disheartening.
Yeah, it is. Okay. So let's move on now to a different kind of dispute.
Okay.
The ongoing election challenge in North Carolina.
Oh, right. So the Republican candidate who narrowly lost the state Supreme Court election back in November,
Right.
he's still trying to overturn the results.
Yeah, he's not giving up.
No, he's not. And his whole argument centers around these alleged problems with voter registration.
Voter registrations, what kind of problems?
Well, he's claiming that thousands of people who voted in the election
Right.
weren't actually eligible to do so.
Because of problems with their voter registration?
Exactly. He says they didn't provide proper proof of identity when they registered it.
Okay, but didn't a lot of these voters actually provide the required information?
Yeah, reportedly they did, but it wasn't properly documented by election officials.
So it's like a bureaucratic screw-up.
It seems like it. Yeah.
And now this candidate is trying to use that to invalidate their votes?
Exactly. And what's interesting is that the State Board of Elections initially dismissed this case,
Okay.
but then an appeals court ruled in favor of the Republican candidate.
Oh, wow. So they're saying that these voters should be given a chance to fix their registrations after the election has already happened.
Yeah, they're calling it an opportunity to cure their registration.
Cure their registrations after the election? That seems kind of...
It does seem a little strange.
Yeah, I mean, how do you even do that?
Right. I mean, it's a logistical nightmare.
Yeah, you're talking about tracking down potentially thousands of voters.
And not everyone's easy to reach. Some people might be overseas.
Yeah.
Some might have moved.
Right, so it seems incredibly difficult and not to mention unfair.
Right, because you're changing the rules of the game after the game has already been played.
Exactly. And, you know, the dissenting judge on the appeals panel, he made a pretty strong argument against that.
What did he say?
He basically said you can't just change the rules after the fact.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah, it does to me too. Now it looks like this case is going to